Hi, welcome. My name is Alison Domakin. I'm the Practice and Engagement Lead with PSDP. And Gillian, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hello, I'm Gillian Rouge, Professor of Social Work at the University of Sussex.
And we're here for the next 55 minutes to talk to you and give you information and a taster about PSDP. So the title of the session is Building a Relational Model of Supervision in Children's Social Care. And I just want to say before we get started, I've been taking a little slide peek at who's joining us today, and there are a number of familiar names. So I know there are some people who've done PSDP, some who have been involved in supporting practice supervisors in local authorities and trusts who've done PSDP. So you're the experts, not us, and I really encourage you as we go through the information in the session to highlight points or whatever you want to put into the chat function. I think it'd be really helpful for other people within the meeting. So this session is for everybody. We're going to talk about PSDP and tell you a little bit more about what it is, but it's for everybody, and we hope you find something useful within that. Next slide, please, Gillian. So this is what we're going to do. We'll tell you what PSDP is and what the programme has been working to achieve within the children's social care sector. We want to share some key learning with you from practice supervisors and middle leaders who've attended PSDP. And when Gillian and I were planning the session, we didn't want it just to be that we're talking to you about PSDP. We wanted to give you a little taster experience of some of the activities within PSDP, and I know that Gillian will kind of tell you later on why the ones we've chosen are really significant. And we want to finish off by prompting you to think about how you can contribute to the development of a positive culture of supervision within your own organisation. I think the last point I wanted to make by way of introduction, I was just chatting about this before we came into the session. What we are talking about with PSDP is, in some senses, it's not groundbreaking. It's not going to tell you something new this afternoon particularly, but it's about re-engaging with what we know to be important within children's social care and within the whole social work sector, about the importance of relational, emotionally literate, curious, containing supervision, and about re-embracing the importance of that. So Gillian, over to you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Alison's just used those words, which I think are pivotal and central to the principles underlying the PSDP, which are about reflection, relationships, respect, and curiosity. And we took, during the course of the programme, we've delivered it over the past 2 years. We started using this resource called Kit Bag, which was originally designed to promote children's social and emotional literacy, but actually has much wider application in that it's really about us all developing our social and emotional literacy, because it's something that we're all pretty poor at. Talking about our feelings, naming our emotions is something we don't always readily do. And it's quite surprising, really, how on the programme, when we've begun to use some of these resources, how people have commented on getting back in touch with things that are fundamental to social work that along the way had got lost. So just taking a couple of resources that are in this kit bag, we're going to start by using the presence cards, which are a way of really being mindful. They come from the mindfulness tradition and help us sort of be really present in the moment, much as we try and help people think about being present in supervision, whether you're the supervisor or the supervisee, being there together in that moment, in that supervision space, not having been left behind in the previous meeting or encounter, or rushing ahead to the next activity. So I'd like to invite you, I can't see you on screen, but I'd like to assume that you're doing this, and Alison will demonstrate it. I can see her. I'd just like to invite you to sort of wriggle around in your chair for a minute and put your feet firmly on the ground so that you really feel the solidity of the space and place that you're in. To have your back not leaning against the back of your chair or your sofa or wherever you're sitting, but just gently upright with the vertebrae falling naturally into place with gravity, with your hands just gently open in your lap, and either closing your eyes or casting them down, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And I'm going to just read the invitation on the card, and then we're going to take a minute. I've got my minute timer here. So we'll take a minute just in silence together to respond to the invitation. And at the end of that minute, I'll invite you to come back together. So the invitation is to rest your thinking mind. Tune into your breath, your pulse, your body. Rest your thinking mind. Tune into your breath, your pulse, your body. Okay. I'm not quite sure how many we're up to numbers wise on this call, but whenever we do this exercise, particularly online, there's something I find quite moving about knowing that however we're responding to it, we're all engaging in the same task at that moment in the silence. And so you may just want to put into the chat a word or a little comment about what you noticed about that. People often comment on how long or short a minute feels. You may have got in touch with something that you weren't quite aware of. So you might just want to put, stirred up, calm, whatever it is. It would be lovely to hear, and you can see each other's responses in the chat as we go along. The second activity that we've used quite effectively on PSDP is, you can see it in the picture here, and I'll just show it on the camera, what's called the feelings card. And again, it's very simply a way of helping people identify what they might be feeling at the moment. If you think about children, quite often they have very strong feelings, but they don't know the words that might connect to what that feeling is or what that emotional state is. And equally, for us, it can be helpful to think through colours or through other imagery. It doesn't just have to be colours. To think about which colour you are, or we could use animals, for example, and think about what sort of animal am I feeling like today, to get in touch with the feelings that are at the fore. So again, we can't go round, there's far too many of us, but just invite you to take a look at the colours that you can see and identify which colour or colours you are. Oh. Could we just ask for mics to be turned off, please? Thank you. Great. It was just echo coming back. Yeah, which colour, or you maybe multiple colours, you're feeling at the moment, and just think for yourself what they represent for you. And again, you might want to put something in the chat of the colour and the feeling that it evokes. So these are just simple ways, really, of helping people begin to get in touch with their emotions. And we've heard a lot of feedback from people who've been on the Practice Supervisors programme about how they've used these resources really creatively with their teams and have been surprised by the impact they've had and how they've really opened up a much more sort of emotionally engaged culture and climate within the team.
Thank you, Gillian. And lots. I think basically you've been a tonic there, judging from the comments in the chat, in terms of the colours and the chance to have that minute to be there. I wanted to be quiet rather. I wanted to add one comment to what Gillian was saying there around those icebreakers, because additionally, lots of PSDP practice supervisors have talked to us about how those icebreaker activities have helped them and the supervisee move into that kind of zone for reflection and slowing down, just as it did with you from your comments in the chat there. So you may have heard of PSDP. You may be asking, what are they going on? They keep talking about PSDP. What exactly is it? So a little bit of a presentation from me. I'm going to try and keep it short so we can get onto the kind of main exercise. But PSDP started in late 2018, and it's delivered by a consortium of agencies that include Sussex University, Goldsmiths University, Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation, the Tavistock Clinic, and I almost forgot my own organisation then, Research in Practice. So just to tell you a little bit more about it, and I really encourage people who've done PSDP to join in the chat and talk to us. So before we had COVID, feels like a different world, doesn't it? But PSDP was originally set up as a residential programme. It's funded by DFE, and the remit at that point was to offer a training programme for newly appointed practice supervisors. As we went online, we've moved now to 3 two-day blocks. So it always was held over 3 to 4 months rather, with 2-day blocks. And a key point here with PSDP is that content and delivery are aligned. And what we mean by that is the kind of vision of PSDP, that exactly as Gillian said, that relational, relationship-based, emotionally literate, curious supervision. We feel very strongly that we need to model that in terms of how facilitators and everyone within PSDP relates to the sector, relates to practice supervisors and undertakes their work. Also, Gillian, you'll be able to talk. You did a scoping review. You'll be able to talk more to this. But once we got the contract, we did a kind of scoping review. We consulted with experts by experience in the sector, professionals, etc., people working within the field to find out, well, what is it that we need to do. And crucially, Gillian undertook a literature review, looking then at what would the key features be of a really effective CPD programme. And one of the things that came up was that it needed to have kind of many elements. If we just did a teaching course, it wouldn't be enough. So we've included different elements. There's preparation that we ask people to undertake, some feedback from someone they supervise, from their manager, to think about themselves at the start of the programme and their learning needs. We also focus on different models of group supervision within the course, and the 6 taught days are supported by 2 to 1-to-1 kind of coaching or reflection sessions, kind of held separately outside the teaching space, to allow people to think about some of the challenges and opportunities or relevance of what they've been thinking about to their job. And it's all supported by an open access website with over 100 resources, which I'll talk more about later. Gillian, next slide, please, if that's okay. The overarching themes, these were developed right at the beginning, I think, before I was in post, and I think I'd update them now, and I'll not run this past Gillian, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. But the kind of core features is about professional leadership, but it's about the different elements of that. So the key content that we look at and the things that we explore together are about relationship-based practice. Here's this expression again: emotionally intelligent, reflective, curious supervision practice. And the notion of developing and supporting excellent practitioners. We talk a lot about knowing your team and building those relationships with them. We talk a lot about systemic thinking and parallel process. And parallel process being something that we go on about an awful lot, namely how you relate to your supervisees, how people relate to each other at all levels of the organisation, influences how ultimately practitioners go out and work with families. If we're held and contained, then as social workers, then we will be able to go out and hold and contain the people that we work with. We apply theory and evidence. It's evidence informed, and we look at ways of supporting practice supervisors to influence the practice system. We hold a number of cohorts. We've had about 1,300 practice supervisors throughout England go through the programme now, and each time we run a series of cohorts, we reserve some particular courses for local authorities and trusts on an improvement journey, and the idea being that they get more time, attention, space, more practice supervisors to go through at one time. And there's a particular focus within those courses on meeting with encouraging senior leaders to join us on the last day, and for practice supervisors to share with them their ideas about how they might influence the practice system and be supported to embed the learning. Thank you, Gillian. I'll move on. So people who were with us yesterday were just fresh and jubilant from having undertaken our first online PSDP conference yesterday. And I know there's some people here today who were with us yesterday. So this pie will be familiar to you. We talked about it yesterday. So if we had to kind of put into just 3 short statements about what PSDP is about, it's about building honest, trusting relationships, about those being characterised by high support and high expectations, respectful challenge at all levels of the organisation. Simple for me to say, very difficult given the pressures that organisations face for that to happen in practice. And we understand the many challenges that get in the way of that. We're talking about the need for emotionally literate, reflective, curious supervision, and crucially, as I've said there, we think that those patterns of behaviours and relationships between supervisors and supervisees really do make a difference in practice. On the programme, we have Annie, a parent who's got experience of the child protection process, who talks about the fact that when a social worker comes into her living room who has not been supported and supervised well, it's noticeable to her. And when social workers are supported, she's able to really see that in the quality of their interaction with her. I'll move on. Thanks, Gillian. So again, we spoke about this yesterday. We are reclaiming emotion in supervision. We're talking in PSDP that, using the quote from Patterson here, at its best, professional supervision provides a safe space where feelings stirred up by close and sustained involvement in this kind of work can be given expression, so that practitioners retain the ability to feel empathy, to see, to hear, and to think clearly. And I think that quote really shows how fundamental to the thinking, the assessment process, the process of building relationships, and all the kind of messy complexity of social work practice, about how important that is to allow us to do the work effectively. And the second quote, Jones and Williams, again cited by Patterson, she talks about the supervisor needs to actively feel the worker's emotions while still retaining balance of mind. So the supervisor taking on a really fundamental role in helping to process emotions in supervision. Next slide, please. Thank you, Gillian. And I wanted to just share some learning with you about what we've learned from practice supervisors who've done PSDP. None of this is rocket science, but I think it's really important that we kind of reconnect with the detail of what practice supervisors are telling us about what they need to support their learning. So practice supervisors have told us that they want organisations to ask them about what they've learned, to take an interest and understand that they're doing PSDP, and think about then, talk to them about how that can be useful to the organisation. To set a kind of climate and organisational culture that encourages practice supervisors to try out new ideas and share learning. Many of the practice supervisors who've done PSDP talk about how creative an experience it has been for them, and they want to continue that process as we go forward. It's also about setting expectations, and this comes through really clearly from our feedback, that actually practice supervisors need protected time outside the office to learn alongside and network with peers. That conversation with other people on PSDP is so important. Practice supervisors themselves need regular reflective supervision to discuss challenges and test out ideas. And what we hear time and time again is that practice supervisors say, I've really thought about the fact that I support my supervisees, and the importance of reflective supervision. And then I think, Well, who supports me? Actually, my line management supervision tends to be more data kind of heavy, or compliance process, thinking about the organisational tasks rather than a reflective space. And thinking about reflective space, practice supervisors talk about just really important to meet with other people doing the same role, not an agenda-led meeting, but a free space to reflect on dilemmas and talk about some of the complexities of the role. Moving on to the next slide, and then I'm let Gillian take over. We really felt that what practice supervisors have told us, it's important for organisations to recognise what practice supervisors do. So we need to see the role of practice supervisors much more than providing supervision, and we focus a lot in PSDP on leadership, on developing practitioners, about giving feedback, just that whole role practice supervisors have in building a team culture that sustains practitioners. We need to invest in learning and development for practice supervisors, and it can be very patchy and inconsistent in terms of provision around the country. And we need to create more opportunities within the organisation to support reflection and practice discussion. That seems so simple, but it has been one of the things, I think, in terms of engaging with the sector, has been a real challenge that's been fed back to the sector time and time again about creating those spaces. And lastly, we need those within organisations, and particular senior leaders. We need to model reflection, self-care and emotional literacy within the whole organisation and model that. And we need to build a culture of learning, dialogue and feedback within the organisation so that those courageous conversations can happen that influence the practice system. Next slide, please, Gillian. And I think nearly over to you. One thing that we wanted to say just before we move on was that this year we were asked by the Department for Education, who fund PSDP, to develop a new course, and that really relates to the fact that all these practice supervisors have said, yeah, but what about our managers? What about the kind of reflective supervision we'd like to have? So this course is aimed at managers of practice supervisors, often heads of service managers, a kind of similar course, truncated. And do you know what they said to us? It's been successful. We've had about 300 staff go through this. They've said to us, do you know what? We'd love to have reflective supervision. We'd love to network with peers. So it's building this PSDP vision of practice supervision at every level of the organisation. I'm slightly over time, so let's see how we are with the next slide. Wanted to just say to you, when we've done our evaluation, our key performance indicators for DFE, we have found through asking practice supervisors and managers to rate their skills and their knowledge at 3 points, start of the programme, part way through, and 3 to 6 months afterwards. Actually, the two greatest areas of development have been in relation to performance management and improvement, feeling confident to really raise issues with team members, and emotionally intelligent practice supervision. And we're happy with that. That's great. Thanks, Gillian. The next one. Fabulous. Last one from me, really quick plug. One of the key things when the consortium started to work together was they wanted to be collaborative and they wanted to share with the sector. So this is just a plug for the PSDP Open Access website. We've got resources for practice supervisors, resources for managers of practice supervisors, although there's, some intermingling between the two, they're not restricted. Please, if you haven't already, do take a look. They're open access, they're free for you, and they're specifically written with a view to being useful, that you can read it, take it into supervision and start to use the tool. It's really relevant for you. Okay, Gillian, I think we're over to you now on the next slide. I feel like I've given you the quickest and slightly incoherent romp through a little bit of what PSDP is and trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, you've done that a great job there, Alison. Sorry, we've got some feedback again. Anybody's got their mic on? Thank you. And I just want to echo this because Alison was the person behind the website. Much of its success is down to Alison, and there are some extraordinary resources on there. And it was also part of the sustainability agenda for the programme, that we wanted it to be there beyond the time of delivery. We've now delivered 3 waves of PSDP, and at the moment there's no there's nothing in the bag yet to do anymore. It may come, we don't know. But therefore, this is something that those people who haven't had the opportunity to be on it can draw on in order to build on the principles that have been established by the people who've already partaken in the programme. So this is your opportunity now to have a little taste of it. We didn't say at the beginning, but perhaps we should have said, if you can grab yourselves a piece of paper, the bigger the better. If we were in a room with you, we'd be offering you a piece of flip chart paper. But whatever you've got to hand, again, if we're in the room or if you were online doing the PSDP, we sent everybody a kind of goodie bag to make up for the fact that you weren't in a hotel in which you got felt tips. And there's nobody who doesn't enjoy using a felt tip and having an excuse to use some colour. So you might need to raid your child's pencil case if that's to hand. But this exercise is one that landed very well with people on both programmes, interestingly, that there's something about the principles and the materials in our programme that seem to speak to people almost regardless of the level in the organisation. And it is, as Alison said, something about helping people get back in touch with their motivation for coming into social work and the values that underpin it. So we'd like to give you, I think it'll be about 10 minutes just to work quietly on your own and to undertake what we call the lifeline exercise. So we're inviting you to think about how you have got to where you have got to in terms of your professional journey. So much as we ask children and families to engage in a lifeline exercise to help us and them understand their journey and how their life has got to where it is, this is about your professional journey. So what have been the influences and incidents that have shaped that journey? And you can draw it as creatively as you like. And normally, again, we would be sharing it within the group in pairs or threes. That won't be possible, but we'll invite you to perhaps put in the chat what it's got you in touch with having done it. And as you're doing it, and we'll leave these on screen, there are some prompt questions here about what those influences might have been that have shaped the journey to date. And we particularly invite you to think about issues of power and authority, how you experience and have experienced power and authority within your family settings and within your professional working life. So lots of prompt questions here about where you've fitted in the family and how your family has behaved and how your gender and ethnicity and class might influence it, how power, authority, emotions might influence it. Lots to think about. So we're going to hand over to you now. It's 24 minutes past 3 at the moment, so we'll come back just before 25 to 4. Is that about right, Alison? Don't worry. I mean, I think that's plenty. You know, it gives you a start. You might not have finished it. You might only be just thinking about the first stage. It doesn't matter, but we'll just be quiet now and invite you to have a go and see what it brings up for you. Okay, so if we could just have your attention back again. And yes, do feel free to put anything that you think might be of interest to people from your engagement. We would obviously in the room be asking you to share your thoughts now with each other about what this has provoked for you. And what we found is that it's been a really lively session at the beginning of the first day of the programme. And then since then, many supervisors have let us know that they have gone on to use this with their supervisees and found that it's been quite transformative in the building of relationships with people as it's opened up conversations that they might not otherwise have had. And I think particularly around power and authority, because for many people, these can be difficult concepts, phenomenon, and something that they may not feel comfortable about taking on in the role of a practice supervisor. So getting in touch with what your influences are in relation to your relationship with power and authority can be really insightful. The other exercise that we do early on that we won't have time to do today, but we wanted to share it with you, and another one that's been very popular with people on the programme, and maybe something that other people who perhaps, if you've done any systemic training, might have come across, is what's called the social graces. As you can see, lots of A's and C's and E's at the top of the screen, not somebody's hand caught on the keyboard, but down the side you can see they're all qualities, identity features of who we are.
Gillian, sorry to interject. I think the slide needs moving on.
Oh, is it not showing the graces?
Not for me. I think other people. Let's see. Can
tell you? It's showing for me.
No, me neither.
Me
Right, good. Thank you. Let's come out.
Sorry to interject.
No, that's really helpful because we had this yesterday, didn't we? So let me come out and then I'll open it again. I don't know why that is.
What would a session be without a bit of technical glitch, eh? I think it's coming up now, Gillian.
Great. And we've got quite good at, as we say, modelling imperfect perfection. So here you have the social graces with all those A's and C's and E's. What we talk about now is intersectionality, the intersectional features of our lives. And this is not a definitive list. There may be things that you would want to add, but these are some of the most common ways that people identify themselves. And so we invite people to think about this in relation to themselves. And then, of course, it becomes another very useful tool to use in supervision, to ask supervisees to share their social graces and for the supervisor to share their social graces, so that you build a conversation about who am I and what influences how I am and how I see you and you see me. And the way this can be broken down as an exercise is that we talk about the graces that are visible and voiced, or invisible and unvoiced. So a quadrant here of how you might begin to position those different graces on the previous slide, according to whether they're something that you can see. So it might be gender, male or female, but of course that now is something that we don't take for granted. It's not entirely clear always what somebody's gender is, or certainly their sexual orientation, for example. So if we look at a slide where somebody's had a go at this, you begin to see where people might position for themselves, and everybody will have their own interpretation of this, their social graces. And that some of them, as you can see here, sexual orientation comes invisible and unvoiced. So some things might appear in more than one quadrant. But the most important thing about this exercise is that it invites conversation about who we are, helps us get in touch with our unconscious bias, and I think is particularly important as we become more and more aware of the importance of engaging in conversations about diversity and identity. So these are something that we started the programme with, but have become even more passionate about. Following the developments last year in the Black Lives Matter movement, we've really tried to embed our understanding of anti-racist, anti-oppressive practice into more features of the PSDP programme. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Alison. What I can't see, unfortunately, doing it this way is anything that's going on in the chat. So I don't know, Alison, whether you want to pick up on any of that before we move on to the last few slides.
It was just a point to highlight. Somebody had asked if the slides will be shared, and Catherine has come back to us saying that we're not sharing slides, but the session is recorded, so available afterwards. And just in response to the activity you did, Gillian, lots of people identifying influences, things that are important to them from that lifeline exercise.
Great, that's really good to hear. So thank you for taking part in that. These then you can see are also available on the website that we've referred to already. So they're things you can go back to and read a bit more about the background to them and how you might use them in your own practice.
Okay, so one of the things, I suppose, if we're thinking systemically, the kind of level we've been operating on there with those exercises that Gillian has just led, have been thinking about the impact of or working on the level of the individual practitioner and the practice supervisor in supervision. And lots of practice supervisors have come away, as I said, from PSDP, really energised and enthused to kind of start on, I'm going to try some of these things out. I'm going to say to my team, I've done PSDP, bear with me, I'm going to try a few new things out. And that's great. But if we're thinking about kind of systemic change, it can't just be from the kind of bottom up. It can't only be that level of the system that's operating a different way. So one of the kind of big questions then that we've engaged with is asking the sector, well, what support, as I said in the presentation, what support do practice supervisors need to be more effective in role, to be supported to make these changes? You can't do it all on your own, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just enough having the enthusiasm. We need to be supported within our organisational context to do supervision well. So we wanted to invite you at this point to reflect. And the first question we want to ask you to consider is to think about what support you might need to provide more reflective supervision. And what I'm going to do in a moment is ask you, taking a trick out of Gillian's kind of book here, is I'm going to ask you to turn off your cameras and just free write for 2 minutes on this, just anything that comes to mind. Let your mind just wander free. What support do you need to provide more reflective supervision? So it's 15:42 by my laptop. I will turn my camera off, I'll turn my sound off, invite you to do the same. And when it gets to 15:44 by my laptop, I'll come back in. Thank you. Okay. And that's us at 15:44. So I think encourage you now just to share in the chat as appropriate and what feels safe to you, but about what struck you when you were free writing there. It's amazing, even in 2 minutes, how much we can get in touch with if we're allowed the time to kind of think. So what support do you think do you need to be able to provide more reflective supervision or be able to engage in more reflective supervision? Do I still have you with me? Are you there?
Me?
Oh, lovely. Thank you. I think my laptop froze for a moment. I always thought I was shouting into the void there, but that's great. So yeah, some great comments coming up. Consider what the supervisees learn as opposed to what they've done. Time is a big factor. Absolutely right, Karen, there. And one of the things, if I just may comment on that for a moment, one of the things that we try and talk about on PSDP and reflect is the fact that reflective supervision isn't about having longer supervision. It's about tools, techniques, ideas, relationships, ways of being that allow you to achieve critical depth within the time available to you in those kind of busy, pressurized environments you work with. Clear supervision contract and agreed template from Karen again there. And again, one of the things that we cover on right at the start of the programme is thinking about taking a relational approach to supervision agreements or contracts and the importance of really clarifying and defining the different functions of that supervision relationship at the outset. Gillian, I think it's over to yourself now for the last question or so.
Well, also just to touch on the middle question here about how might you talk to your supervisor about shifting the focus in supervision to allow more time for reflection? Because as Alison has said so clearly, it's not simply just about what you offer, but also what you are provided with, and that you can only continue to offer. And if we think about the feeding analogy, you can only continue to feed and nourish those practitioners that you're responsible for if you yourself are fed and nourished. And one of the features again of the programme is what we talk about quite a lot is people having courageous conversations. And by this, we often mean it can be in a number of ways. It can be practitioners having courageous conversations with families where they've got real concerns about how it's going to be received. But also you as a supervisor having what might feel like quite a courageous conversation with those people who are your line managers or in more senior positions to you, in order to make them aware of what it is you're experiencing and what it is you feel would be beneficial. So another kind of rhetorical question back to you is, what would help you have a courageous conversation with your supervisor in order to ensure that your needs are met, so that supervisees benefit from you being well fed and families benefit from the practitioners who are working with them being well fed. And I don't know, Alison, is there on the repository, is there anything around courageous conversations?
There's a tool on courageous conversations, which I'll just find and link up there. Yes.
Go into the chat. So everything, as you can see, is catered for. So finally, with just 2 minutes before the end of our session, this final question to you, what will be the one thing that you will do in relation to supervision in light of having attended this workshop with us today? And it would be great if you could put that into the chat, if that feels appropriate and possible, so that we can get a sense again of how is this landed. And already we feel the programme has had an enormous impact on the sector, with over, as Alison said, 1,000 people having been through it. And what we hope is that the ripple effect will continue. And so people, even attending these workshops, will begin to think about how they can shift in small ways features of their supervision, which ultimately begin to impact on the culture of their team, and then eventually, we would hope the organisation. So as we sign off today, and thank you for attending and hope that it's been informative and interesting for you, we look forward to seeing your comments in the chat.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Professor Gillian Rush, for such an insightful presentation. I was reflecting that I would have loved to have this model when I was in children's services. Once again, for those of you who are interested to see the slides, and I have seen in the chat quite a lot of questions to Alison and Gillian, please be aware that this recording is going to be made available with consent from Gillian and Alison on our website, probably the end of next week, on our YouTube channel, Social Work England. I really hope that all of you enjoyed this session, and if you are a social worker, you might want to use this opportunity to use this as part of your CPD, as part of your reflection for adding to your CPD and meeting professional standards. Once again, a big thank you to Gillian and Alison, but also a big thank you to all the participants in this workshop. You've been really engaging, and I have enjoyed to see the comments coming through the chat as well. Thank you. And I can see lots of amazing feedback going on in the chat.